Keep your money.
Evelyn.
I was the random guest the Millionaire CEO kissed in the middle of a wedding, and, in front of everyone, he instantly declared me the love of his life. All I had was a sewing kit and one rule: never get noticed by the rich. That night, Callum Pierce held my face and kissed me in front of everyone. He offered me money to pretend to be the love of his life. I knew it was a lie. I knew there was a deadline, a price, and a risk, but I accepted anyway. It seemed simple. One night, one role, no feelings. But he started looking at me as if he'd forgotten it was all a charade. When the truth comes out, the scandal will be the least of my problems. Hi, I'm Kay. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1, The Wrong Hall. The service door gave way with a low creak, and I stepped in clutching the sewing kit against my chest like a shield. The back hallway of the hall smelled of expensive flowers and melted wax, 2 white lilies, 2 white roses, an excess of purity that always precedes a troubled wedding. Somewhere in the back, someone was tuning a violin, a C string that insisted on coming out 3 tones flat. I wasn't supposed to be there. I'd been hired the day before, over the phone, by a frazzled assistant who mispronounced my name 3 times before hanging up. My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm 27 years old, and I restore vintage dresses in a small atelier in Boston. I make my living off other people's tears, the lace that split at the hem, the brooch that ripped the great-grandmother's silk, the veil nobody wanted to throw away because its history weighed more than the damage. I'm practical, discreet, and I have one simple rule about the rich. They pay well, but they never look twice at whoever silently saves their disasters. I prefer it that way. Invisible is less trouble. I reached the bride's antechamber exactly 20 minutes before the ceremony. Marisol Ainsworth, 28 years old, heiress to the right name and owner of the most talked-about wedding of the Boston winter, stood in the center of the room with her great-grandmother's vintage veil draped over her shoulder like a wounded animal. The cold morning light slanted in through the tall windows, struck the aged ivory, and revealed every thread crying out for help. "Are you the seamstress?" she asked, in the thin voice of someone who'd cried in the last 5 minutes. "Restorer." I was already opening the kit on top of the armchair. "Sit. Show me the damage." The brooch had torn 3 centimeters of lace on the side of the veil. Old, fragile, beyond saving if I forced it. I knelt on the carpeted floor, took the finest needle I had, chose the thread that matched the tone of the aged ivory, and began. Marisol breathed deeply 5 times. I worked in silence, counting the stitches inside my head, feeling the carpet prickle faintly against my shins. In 15 minutes, the lace was lace again, and the great-grandmother's brooch was a jewel again, not a weapon. "I could kiss you," Marisol said, touching the veil as if touching a carefully tended scar. "I'd prefer the check." She laughed for the first time that day, and handed me the envelope her mother had left ready. I tucked it inside the kit, closed the lid, and rose from the floor, brushing off the black tailored suit I wear for these jobs. Neutral, charmless, designed not to appear in a single photo. "Can I leave through the service door?" I asked. "End of the hallway on the left," Marisol answered, already turning to the mirror. I thanked her, picked up the kit, and left. The back hallway had 2 identical doors, both painted in the same dark varnish, both with the same gold knob worn down in the middle. I clearly remember thinking, left, and turning left. I must have missed the first turn, or counted 1 chair leg too many, because instead of the service courtyard with the taxi waiting for me, I found myself facing a heavy velvet curtain. Behind it, I heard a murmur I wasn't supposed to be hearing, the rounded sound of 400 people in polite silence, waiting for something to happen. I pushed the curtain 2 centimeters apart to confirm the disaster. It was the disaster. I had walked into the main reception hall from the right flank, behind a row of decorative palms, in the middle of the welcome ceremony. The chandeliers dripped golden light over the styled heads, and the air was too warm for the black suit. A man in a white tuxedo held a microphone on a small stage in the back. In front of the stage, standing in a circle of guests, was a woman in a blood-red dress with her hair pinned up high and a smile that didn't match the temperature of the room. She also had a microphone. She was opening her mouth, and exactly across from her, leaning against a column as if the column were the only thing holding him up, was a man in a black tuxedo I didn't recognize. He was about 6 feet, maybe a little more, dark hair, too perfectly slicked, tense jaw. His gaze fixed on the woman in red, with a polite calm that fooled no one with eyes to see. Underneath, he was about to break something. Probably the column, I thought. "Back off, Evelyn," and I took half a step back. The velvet of the curtain weighed on my shoulders, cold and dusty, and reminded me exactly what I was there, an intruder in a wrinkled suit holding a box of needles. That's when the woman in red raised the microphone to her mouth and said, in a tone meant to be sweet, "I wanted to tell everyone, now that we're all together." The man at the column glanced to the side. He looked straight at me. It wasn't a look of distress. It was a look of calculation. 3 seconds, maybe 4. The time it takes a man used to deciding fast to choose the cheapest emergency exit. The time it took me to understand, too late, that the emergency exit was me. He crossed the hall in 3 strides. I swear I tried to back away. The curtain was behind me, the sewing kit in front of me, and there was a decorative palm between me and any rational escape route. He didn't excuse himself. He didn't say my name, because he didn't know it. He just stopped half a meter from my face, raised both hands with frightening certainty, held my cheeks the way you'd hold porcelain, and kissed me on the mouth in front of the entire hall. It was quick. It was clean. It was the kiss of a man who had made up his mind, and it was the kiss of a man who was afraid, and those two things don't go together. And yet there they were, pressed against my mouth. The sewing kit slipped in my lap and nearly landed on his right foot. I tightened my fingers just in time, feeling the leather strap bite into my palm. I tasted mint, faint, almost clinical, as if he'd chewed a lozenge minutes before deciding to ruin my afternoon. I noted, with the part of my brain that still worked, that he smelled of something expensive and dry, maybe cedar, maybe amber. I wasn't in any condition to run forensics. He pulled back a centimeter. His eyes met mine, gray, cold, pleading, not in words. Before I could land the slap that was organizing itself in my wrist, he turned to the hall, fixed a magazine cover smile on his face, and lifted my hand in his like someone showing off a trophy. "Forgive the interruption," he said, in a low, trained voice, calibrated exactly to the size of the room. "I've finally found the courage to introduce the woman I love." The silence in the hall lasted 3 seconds, 400 people processing all at once. I heard, with ridiculous clarity, the ice cracking in a glass somewhere to my right. The woman in red went white. The microphone in her hand trembled once. Someone dropped a glass in a corner, and the crystal cracked against the floor like the second gunshot of the afternoon. The Society Press photographers woke from the shock simultaneously, and the first flash went off in the right corner like a gunshot, then the second, then 20. I couldn't move. His hand held mine, firm, in midair. The other slid to my waist as if it had been there for 5 years. I felt the texture of my own black suit against his fingers and thought, idiotically, that I'd spent the morning kneeling on the carpet, and my skirt must have been wrinkled in the back. Then I thought that this was exactly the kind of detail a woman in a wrinkled suit shouldn't be thinking about while being kissed by a stranger. I looked at him with the clearest face I could assemble in half a second, the face of a woman who would, yes, kill him, slowly, with the number 3 scissors from my kit. He understood. He tightened his grip on my waist a centimeter more, tilted his head discreetly toward my ear, and whispered, so low only I could hear, in the voice of a man calculating how much he'd have to pay for the next sentence, "Please, just don't slap me right now." Chapter 2, The One Night Lie. I didn't slap him. I smiled. I smiled the way I smile at clients who ask for a discount. Teeth and nothing more. He understood the smile, because his grip on my waist shifted a millimeter, and he pulled me out of the hall with the calculated elegance of someone pretending to lead the bride to the next toast. We crossed the red carpet amid the flashes. He turned right through a discreet side door, the door of a man who knows the hall's floor plan. He pushed. He closed it behind us. It was a small room, with 2 green armchairs, a marble table, and a tall window looking out onto the snow-covered garden. The instant the door clicked, I tore his hand off my waist as if it were a burn. "You." I aimed the sewing kit at his chest. "Are a lunatic. I am a kidnapper of other people's mouths. Technically, I'll sue you down to your great-grandson. You'd probably win. I'll sue you. I have 400 witnesses. I have the press." "You do," he agreed, with an irritating calm. He unbuttoned his jacket, crossed the room to the table, picked up a pitcher, and poured 2 glasses, as if we were on a break from a meeting, as if 400 people weren't, at that exact moment, texting the rest of Boston. "Sit." He held out one of the glasses. "I don't drink with kidnappers. I didn't kidnap you. I kissed you. The difference is legal." He smiled for the first time. It wasn't a pretty smile. It was the smile of a man who'd gone too long without sleep, and discovered he could still find something funny. I didn't like the effect it had on my stomach. "Callum Pierce," he said, offering his free hand. Pierce Meridian Hotels. I know you have no idea who I am. That's the reason you're in this room instead of one of the 200 women who were out there. Evelyn Hart. I didn't shake his hand. Restorer. I came to fix a veil. I fixed it. I was leaving. I know. You knew. No, he corrected, returning his hand to his pocket. I deduced it from the kit, the black suit, and the face of someone forced to leave through the wrong door. I wasn't planning on you. I was planning on anything that moved in the right hall at the wrong moment. Charming. The door opened without a knock. In came a tall, thin man. Square glasses, navy jacket wrinkled at the right elbow. He looked at Callum. He looked at me. He looked at the sewing kit. It took him 3 seconds to file the scene away. Theo Ashworth, he said to me, with a minimal nod. Attorney for Pierce Meridian, friend of the lunatic. He turned back to Callum. The bride is crying, but it's the crying of someone who got a free headline at her own wedding. I've handled worse. Back to me. Miss Hart, may I offer you tea? No. Coffee? No. A lawyer. I'm going to need one. That one's already included, Theo replied, with a dry comma in his voice, and shut the door behind him. Callum took a fountain pen and a thin checkbook in dark leather from his jacket. I saw the gesture and understood before the writing. He leaned on the table, opened the checkbook, wrote without hurry, tore the page along the perforation, and slid it toward me. He said nothing. He figured the number spoke for itself. I looked at the check. 6 digits. More than I'd seen come into the atelier in 2 years. More than the overdue rent no one knew I had. I felt the real weight of the number in the center of my chest. Exactly where you feel overdue rent. I picked up the check. I looked him in the eyes. I tore it in half. I tore it again. I tore it again. I put the pieces back on the table like confetti. I'm not for sale, I said. Not for 6 digits, not for 7. You just invented a romance in the hall. Solve it in the hall. He looked at the confetti in silence. Something passed over his face that I couldn't name. A muscle in his jaw loosened a millimeter. Maybe relief, maybe surprise. I prefer to believe it was surprise, because relief would have been humiliating. The door opened again, without a knock, and this time it was the woman in blood red. Up close, she was even more beautiful, and also even more dangerous. She had that kind of calculated beauty, hair pinned high, heavy earrings, lipstick chosen for the close-up. She crossed her arms, slid her eyes over me from head to toe, and lingered on the low black shoes like someone enjoying a private joke. So, she said, in a voice tuned for the guests who were surely pressed against the door. This is the great love. Sienna? Callum's voice dropped half a tone. Get out. Sienna Vale, she went on, looking straight at me. 31, ex-fiancé, heiress to Vale Wines. She smiled, like someone handing over a business card made of razor blades. You're the little Vale seamstress, aren't you? Marisol mentioned it, said you were a darling, very helpful. Each word had a little point on it. I must confess I found it adorable that Callum had, she searched, taken a chance on someone so outside the circle. Almost charity. The door outside was ajar. I heard the polite silence of a crowded hallway, people waiting to repeat what she was about to say at dinners for the next 6 months. You know how these working girls are, she went on, without needing to raise her voice. They see a chance. They grab it. I can't blame her. I felt the blood rise up the back of my neck before it reached my face. I also felt the sewing kit getting very light in my hand, and while Callum opened his mouth to do something that would surely make it worse, I took half a step forward and looked Sienna in the eyes. If that's how you treat an opportunist, I said quietly, and the silence of the entire hallway leaned in to listen. Maybe you should stick around to see what a real opportunist is capable of. I smiled. Slowly. I held out my hand to Callum without turning my face toward him. Darling, I said, in the sweetest voice I'm capable of, take me to the terrace. Callum took half a second to understand he'd been promoted to participant, and was no longer the author. He took my hand, squeezed gently. He learns fast. We made our way through the guests with the calm of people running late for the next toast. I looked back at Sienna over my shoulder. She'd forgotten to close her mouth. The covered terrace looked out onto the snow garden. Outdoor heaters hummed overhead. There were 30 guests there, pretending to admire the view and dying to hear what we were going to say. Callum led me to the farthest corner, near a potted fig tree, and stopped with his back to the crowd, forming a wall with his body between me and the rest of the world. I owe you the whole night, he said quietly, barely moving his lips more than necessary. You owe me my whole life. We'll negotiate later. My phone buzzed against the sewing kit. Ren Caldwell, best friend, wedding photographer. 29 years old and zero filter. Babe, you're on every live stream in Boston. All of them. I love you. Don't faint. I'm coming over. Who is it? Callum asked. My best friend. Apparently I'm a celebrity now. Smile at the fig tree, darling. There's a camera behind it. He smiled at the tree. Actually smiled. I pretended to laugh as if he'd told a delicious joke. It was 40 minutes of my personal hell. I laughed, shook hands, called him darling 3 times, told a man with a white mustache that yes, it was all very sudden, and that yes, the heart wants what it wants. And inside I made a detailed list of the ways I was going to kill him in the parking lot. Around 11:30 DAOS, he looked at me for the first time as if I were a person, and not a plan B. I'll take you home. I'll take a taxi. Please. My feet hurt. The kit was heavy, and my patience was gone. I accepted. In the car, he said nothing for 10 minutes. Then he said, looking at the road, I hadn't planned it. None of it. I panicked. I noticed, you don't know who I am. Theo gave me the short version. Hotels, billions, family drama. I'm up to speed. He laughed softly. It was a new sound. I didn't know it yet, but I noted it. We talked about the strictly practical. 1 week of pretending. No money involved. In exchange, he'd make sure no headline called me an opportunist. Theo would draft something on paper if I wanted. I said I trusted his word, which was the first lie of the whole night that I told on my own behalf. The car stopped at the entrance to my building. I opened the door with the kit under my arm. Before getting out, I turned to him one last time. Good night, Mr. Pierce. He looked at me. He took half a second. Then he said, in the low voice I hadn't yet heard at that calibration, Good night, Hart. I got out of the car. I shut the door. I walked to the entrance without looking back. I rode up the elevator. I got to the apartment. I set the kit on the table. I took off my shoes. And only there, with my feet on the cold kitchen floor, did I realize, more irritated with myself than I'd been in a long time, that I'd noticed exactly how my last name sounded in his mouth. Chapter 3. The Spotlight. She didn't ask for. Monday morning. I still thought the terrace had been the worst of it. I was wrong. The first thing I saw when I opened the atelier curtain was a line of people across the street. Microphones, cameras, 2 cars double parked, a guy in a padded jacket drinking coffee as if he were on a picnic. I closed the curtain slowly, counted to 3, opened it again. It hadn't been a hallucination. No, I said to the empty room. No, no, no. My phone buzzed on the counter. Ren, babe, look out the window. Already did. Look again. I don't want to. Before I could catch my breath, she appeared through the back door, with 2 iced coffees and the face of someone who'd won the lottery. For a good part of my adult life, Ren said, pressing a cup into my hand, I dreamed of seeing a headline involving someone I knew personally. You topped it in 48 hours. She pushed the newspaper across the counter. I read it without meaning to. Callum Pierce's secret great love. Below it, a photo Ren had clearly sold to someone, because nobody else had that angle of the terrace. Did you sell the photo? I didn't sell anything. I sent the agency a shot of you from behind so they'd stop calling me asking for the good ones. That one in the paper came from some other photographer. There were about 30 on that terrace. Swear? Hart, I sell weddings. I don't sell my friend. She nudged the coffee cup a centimeter toward me. This one's on the house. I laughed in spite of myself. It was a short laugh, angry, exhausted. She laughed along. The atelier phone started ringing. Ren answered before I could stop her. Hart Atelier. Good morning. No, she doesn't give interviews. Yes, she takes commissions. No, she doesn't charge by her boyfriend's last name. Have a good day. She hung up. She looked at me as if I were responsible for having a fictional boyfriend. You need a schedule, she said. You need a stern face. And you need to decide whether you're going to use this to your advantage or lock yourself in here until next year. I don't need to decide anything. I need to finish the lining of Mrs. Greaves's dress by Thursday. Mrs. Greaves just called asking for a quote on her granddaughter's dress. She woke up today thinking you're the best restorer in Boston. I've always been the best restorer in Boston. Now people know. I propped my elbows on the counter. I stared at the coffee. The coffee had no answer. The doorbell chimed. Theo Ashworth came in wearing a dark overcoat, a leather portfolio under his arm, and the expression of someone used to walking into places no one had invited him. Ren looked at him, looked at me, smiled out of the corner of her mouth, and raised her hands. I was just leaving. Mrs. Hart, my silence is still for sale. She slipped out the back door with the ease of a cat. Theo waited for the door to close. He took the leather portfolio out from under his arm. He set it on top of the counter. He didn't smile, but his mouth made that minimal movement I'd already learned to recognize as friendship translated into lawyer speak. "Miss Hart, good morning. May I?" He pointed to the corner chair. I nodded. "I've brought this week's schedule," he said, opening the portfolio. "Thursday, an official dinner at a downtown restaurant. Saturday, a family dinner at the Pierce Mansion in Beacon Hill. At both, photographers at a respectful distance. At both, Mr. Pierce will pick you up personally." I looked at the page. Everything organized in small black letters, with time, address, and dress code. "Theo," I said, "I never agreed to any family dinner with Callum." "You didn't," he agreed. "That's why I came before he tries to." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you warning me?" "I'm informing you. There's a subtle difference." "Subtle," I repeated. "You're all incredibly subtle." He almost smiled. "Miss Hart, I need you to understand something. Mr. Pierce has been my friend since college, and he's the first person he's lost the ability to predict. That, in legal terms, tends to be dangerous. In personal terms, it tends to be healthy. I'm not therapy. I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking you to negotiate." I crossed my arms. "Then let's negotiate," I said. "No intimate photos, no questions about my past, about my father, about money. If any journalist asks me anything, I answer for myself. No one writes a speech for me. If I show up to a family dinner, I eat what's served and I say what I think, and the check he tried to give me in the hall stays right where it is in this conversation, torn up." Theo wrote each item with a fountain pen. When he finished, he turned the notebook toward me. "Anything else?" "Yes. If at any point I say I want to stop, he stops. No renegotiating." He wrote it down. He closed the notebook. "Agreed," he said. Compliments on the clarity. He left without saying goodbye, the same way he'd come in. I stood looking at the empty leather portfolio on the counter and thought, quietly, that maybe I'd just signed something without signing anything. Thursday, 7:30 in the evening. Callum's car stopped in front of the atelier. There was no audience this time, just a gloved driver and the back door open as if I were a queen who'd forgotten where she'd put her crown. I came out in a dark, simple dress, pins still in the sleeve because I'd finished a last-minute personal alteration. Callum was leaning against the car, arms crossed. When he saw me, he uncrossed them. Hart, Pierce. I got into the car before he could open the door. I saw in the rearview mirror that he held back a tiny smile. The restaurant was one of those with no sign on the street. You arrived, gave a name, someone took you up to the 3rd floor. All wine-colored velvet, crystal chandeliers, waiters who walked as if the floor were made of glass. We sat at a corner table. He pulled out the chair for me. I sat without thanking him. It was the best joke available. "Hart," he said, opening the menu. "You're going to need to breathe at some point tonight." I breathe. "I'm just saving up for Saturday's dinner." "Theo warned me you were clear. Theo is efficient. Theo is the most expensive person I know." I looked at him over the menu. "Let's agree on something, Pierce. You don't treat me like your fiancé. You treat me like a woman who knows how to read." Agreed. He ordered wine without asking. I was about to protest when he added, "A light red. You can refuse. I'll drink yours too." I stayed quiet because he'd gotten the wine right. The first part of dinner was lighter than I expected. He talked about the chain. I talked about the atelier. He asked where I'd learned to sew. I answered, with my grandmother, in a basement in Somerville, when the house's heating broke in winter. He listened as if he were taking notes. "You don't ask about me," he said, at some point. "I read about you on the plane before I first landed in Boston. I don't need to do an interview. You didn't first land in Boston. You were born here. It was a figure of speech, Pierce. I'm bad at figures of speech." I noticed. He laughed. Small, short, but he laughed. It was exactly at that moment that a man in a blazer approached the table with the smile of someone who'd managed to slip past 3 waiters. I recognized the press badge before I recognized the face. "Miss Hart," the man said, ignoring Callum on purpose. 3 quick questions. The first is whether you were aware of Mr. Pierce's romantic interest before the Ainsworth wedding. I set down my fork. I looked at him calmly. "Sir, if I wanted fame, I'd have picked a nicer man." The table next to us laughed before the journalist finished processing. Callum stared at the ceiling for a second, like someone thanking God for something he can't thank him for out loud. "No further questions," I said, "and, if you don't mind," I ordered the duck. The journalist left. Callum looked at me over his wine glass. "You're dangerous, Hart." We agreed there'd be no big words. There's nothing big about it. I felt the heat rise. I took a sip of wine so I wouldn't give him any attention. Saturday, the family dinner. The Pierce Mansion in Beacon Hill. I'd never set foot in Beacon Hill except to deliver a piece through the back door. The house was exactly what I imagined. High ceilings, dark wood staircases, a permanent smell of furniture polish and old money. Callum introduced me one by one, his hand light on my back, as if I were a fragile object he'd decided to carry across the room without dropping. I met aunts, cousins, someone's granduncle. I met Malcolm Pierce. Malcolm had Callum's eyes, but worse. His smile arrived slowly. His handshake was dry, firm, drawn out. "So you're the famous Evelyn," he said. "Callum, you never told us where you found her." "In the wrong hall," I said, before Callum could answer. "I was on my way out." Malcolm laughed. It wasn't a pretty laugh. "What a shame you got the wrong door." "For me too," I answered. Dessert came on tiny plates with even tinier spoons. I was in the middle of a cup of cream with raspberry when an aunt leaned across the table and said, loudly, "Thank goodness Callum found someone ordinary. It gives the impression he has a heart." Several heads nodded. Callum froze his spoon in midair. I set down my spoon. I smiled politely. "Forgive me," I said, slowly. "But is having a heart new to the family, or just to Callum?" The silence lasted about 2 seconds. Then Malcolm let out a laugh. An aunt laughed along, without quite understanding. Callum brought a hand to his mouth in a way that disguised it poorly. Malcolm smiled more than he needed to. The smile didn't reach his eyes. I noticed. I made a mental note the way I'd note a loose stitch in lace. I escaped to the library after coffee. I knew it existed because I'd read about the house in a decorating magazine Wren had left at the atelier. It was a long room, low-ceilinged, walls of old books, a worn leather sofa near the window. I sat. I closed my eyes. The door opened. Callum came in, closed the door behind him, and stood at an exact distance. "Heart, I need 5 minutes." "So do I." He sat in the armchair across from me. He propped his elbows on his knees. He looked at the rug. "Why old dresses?" he asked. I opened my eyes. "Sorry? Why did you choose to restore old dresses?" "There are more profitable things." I thought about lying. I didn't lie. Because people throw away what can be saved, and no one looks twice at what does the mending. I like being on the side of the things no one wants to see. He was quiet for a moment. Then he raised his eyes. "Am I a thing no one wants to see? You're the opposite of that. Then I'm the opposite problem." He got up. He crossed half the room. He sat on the sofa beside me, leaving a hand's width of distance. The hand's width hurt. "Heart," he said quietly, "if I asked you now whether this is still a lie, would you answer?" I looked at his mouth. I looked too quickly. I felt my breath go ragged, as if someone had pressed a hot needle to my wrist. He leaned half a centimeter. I leaned another half. I stood up before the rest of the centimeter could happen. "Good night, Pierce." I left the library without turning my head. I crossed the room, found the driver, got into the car. Only when the door closed did I rest my forehead against the glass and breathe. Behind me, in some room of that enormous house, Callum Pierce remained in the library, alone. I knew, the same way I know when a seam is going to give before it gives, that he was finally understanding what kind of trouble he'd gotten himself into, and that I, without knowing it, had just gotten myself into the same. Chapter 4. The Secret Bride. Wednesday, 2 in the afternoon. The cafe near the atelier was too crowded for the hour. The steam from the machines fogging the window and a dense smell of burnt beans hanging between the 2 small tables. I ordered a drip coffee, paid up front, and was turning toward the window when someone said my name at the counter as if they already knew me. "Miss Hart." I turned. A man in his early 40s, a light fine wool suit, easy smile, curious eyes. I recognized the face from a newspaper photo before I recognized the man. "Hadrian Bell," he introduced himself. "Chief Financial Officer of Pierce Meridian, Callum's partner." What a wonderful coincidence. "Coincidence," I repeated. "I had a meeting nearby. I always stop at this cafe." He held out his hand. I shook it slowly, feeling the weight of a thick ring on his finger. "Allow me to say that you saved the merger." His image changed in 2 weeks. "We're all in debt to the future, Mrs. Pierce." I smiled without understanding what I was smiling about. "Sorry," I said. "Future what?" He laughed as if I'd told a joke. "Well, no one should be saying it out loud, of course. But between us, the secret bride story fit the board like a glove. It was the missing piece. That encounter of yours at the Ainsworth wedding became a master stroke. The European investors loved learning he'd been with you for months. For months. At least that's what was in the report. Don't take it the wrong way." He lowered his voice, conspiratorial, leaning his body half a step toward me. "I know the public can't know the exact date. Discretion is a costly asset in this line of work. But behind closed doors we celebrate, right?" I gripped the paper cup with both hands so I wouldn't tremble. The heat passed through the thin cardboard, and faintly burned the inside of my fingers. I didn't let go. Right, I said. Discretion. Give Callum my regards, and congratulations once more. Saturday is the dinner with the Swiss. He took his cappuccino from the counter, winked, and left through the street door as if he'd just done me a favor. The little bell on the door jingled and took too long to stop. I stood there for a length of time I couldn't measure. Somewhere, someone called my name at the counter to hand over my coffee. I didn't answer. A couple beside me argued in low voices about a lemon cake. The espresso machine hissed. None of it reached me properly. I left the cafe with the empty cup in my hand. I walked to the atelier without realizing it was raining, the fine rain settling on my coat in nearly invisible drops that only became heavy once the fabric began to cool against my shoulders. I called Theo on the way. He answered on the third ring. Miss Hart. Theo, who is the secret bride? There was a pause that lasted exactly long enough for me to understand. Miss Hart. His voice faltered for half a second, something I'd never heard from Theo. I'd prefer this conversation not happen over the phone. Who is the secret bride? I'm going to call Mr. Pierce and ask him to come to you immediately. No need. I'll call him right now. I hung up. I called Callum 3 times. He didn't answer. Voicemail all 3. I texted, pick up. He called back 17 minutes later, when I was already inside the atelier, soaked, the hem of my coat dripping onto the light wood floor, and a single desk lamp lit near the sewing machine. Hart, I was in a meeting. The investors think I've been your secret bride for months. Silence. I recognized that silence. It was the same silence from the hall before the kiss. The same silence from the car before he said, "Good night, Hart." The silence of calculation. Of a man choosing the right sentence among 3 options already open in his head. "I'm coming over now," he said. "You're not. You're going to answer me over the phone. It's a courtesy you still have. Hart, you let the investors believe I was your fiancé before the Ainsworth wedding. I didn't tell them I was. I let them understand it that way. The difference, Pierce, is the same difference between lying and omitting. To me, it's none. I was going to tell you. When? After the merger." I laughed. It was a short laugh, joyless, with the look of something that would turn into crying if it stayed another second in my mouth. I pressed the bridge of my nose with 2 fingers and breathed through my mouth. "It's over," I said. "Hart, let me. The deal's over. The week's over. Everything we agreed on in the side room is over. I warned you what would happen if you decided what I got to know. You decided. Good luck with your merger, Pierce." I hung up. I set the phone on the counter with a hand too firm. The screen hit the wood and the sound echoed through the empty atelier louder than it should have. Wren knocked on the back door at exactly that moment, with a bag of bread and the face of someone who'd sensed in the air that something had happened. "Tell me," she said, opening the bag. A warm smell of yeast rose between us. Out of place. I told her. Wren listened to the end without interrupting, just chewing slowly, her jaw working like someone grinding the story along with the bread. When I finished, she swallowed and said, "Friday there's that gallery event in Back Bay. You confirmed before the fight. I'm photographing it." "I'm not going," I said. "You are. You don't run." I looked at her. Wren had that way of knowing what I was going to do before I knew. "I'll go," I said, "but I won't go on anyone's arm." "Good. I'll lend you a black coat and my ugly face. They match." Friday, 7 in the evening. Private art gallery in Back Bay. High ceilings, white walls, champagne flutes handed out on trays by waiters with clear instructions to smile. The air had that expensive neutral smell of cold pine and freshly applied floor wax. I arrived alone. Wren was already there, camera around her neck, and the professional expression of someone on the job. I greeted the gallery curator with a measured smile. I walked through the rooms, my low heel sounding dry against the dark wood. I looked at the canvases as if I were capable of looking at canvases. I refused champagne twice. I accepted on the third, holding the thin stem between 2 fingers, just to have somewhere to put my hand. It was in the 4th room that Sienna Vale appeared. Dark red dress, hair pinned up, smile ready for hours. "Evelyn," she said, as if we'd known each other since high school. "You came." "I did." "How brave." "Manners." I'd confirmed. She smiled more. She raised her hand and made a small gesture to someone behind me. Almost immediately, the central light in the room dimmed, and a large screen at the back lit up with the low hum of a projector. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Sienna took a microphone that appeared in her hand as if it had always been there. "Friends," she began. "I wanted to share something I think is of public interest." The first image on the screen was me, leaving a 5-star hotel I'd never set foot in. The second was me, receiving a thick envelope at the door of a restaurant I didn't know. The third was me, whispering something in Callum's ear in a lobby, blurred background, convenient angle. It was my face. It wasn't my life. Some believe, Sienna went on, in a calm voice, that Mr. Pierce found a great love by chance. I, who have known my former fiancé for years, have reasons to believe another version. Miss Hart was paid to be in that hall. She was paid to be kissed. And she was paid, month after month, to maintain a romance that serves his image on the eve of a billion-dollar merger. The silence in the room was the loudest silence I'd ever heard. I noticed, too late, that 2 large cameras had been leaning against the back wall since before the speech. Sienna had tipped off the press before tipping off me. Flashes began going off in my eyes, too white, leaving purple spots behind my eyelids. I heard someone, maybe Mrs. Greaves, maybe not, whisper, "My God," as if they'd swallowed the wrong dessert. I looked at the screen. I looked at Sienna. I looked at Wren, who had lowered her camera and had both hands balled into fists. I felt the heat rise up my neck, stop at my mouth, turn into something cold. The flute in my hand suddenly weighed like stone. The choice was simple. Cry or don't cry. I didn't cry. "Miss Vale," I said, without a microphone, in the voice I used for difficult clients. "If you're willing to forge photographs to win back a man, maybe he had good reasons to leave." Short laughs in some corners. Not all. Most of the people there were already calculating canceled contracts, invitations to be withdrawn, dresses to be returned. I knew it. I saw it in the curator's face, her hand having gone to her pearl necklace and stayed there. I saw it in the faces of 2 women who had hired me in October. I saw it in the face of the gallery owner, who had already shifted his gaze to a fixed point on the floor. A restorer's reputation is built with a needle. It tears with a microphone. Sienna smiled like someone who'd won, and it was at that moment that the main door of the room opened. Callum crossed the gallery diagonally. No coat, his hair wet with rain. I'd never seen Callum wet. I'd never seen Callum without a coat. The tips of his collar darkened against his neck, and there was a drop running down his temple that he didn't bother to wipe. Theo came behind, 2 steps back, with the face of someone who'd given up on control. Callum didn't look at Sienna. He didn't look at me. He went straight to the nearest journalist, asked for the microphone with a short gesture of his hand, and the journalist handed it over without thinking, because that's what people do when Callum Pierce holds out his hand. The flashes tripled. The entire room seemed to narrow around him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Callum began. His voice was controlled as ever, but there was something different underneath, a small hoarseness, something I recognized because I'd heard it in the mansion library. "I am Callum Pierce. I'm going to say 3 things, and then I'm going to leave, and then no one ever needs to hear me speak about my personal life in public again. First thing, at the Ainsworth wedding, I kissed Evelyn Hart without warning, without permission, and without any prior arrangement. Miss Hart was crossing the wrong hall by mistake. I saw her, I panicked, and I made an idiotic decision that involved her face. The fault is mine, entirely." The room stopped breathing. Second thing, that same night, I invented a lie, because it was easier than confronting an ex-fiancé who grabbed a microphone without being invited. I asked Miss Hart to keep up that lie for a week. She accepted for her own reasons, which aren't mine to speak of. At some point during that week, I let investors believe a version of that lie that involved a prior commitment. I didn't clarify. I didn't correct. I omitted. That's my fault. And no forged photograph, no headline, and no wine tonight can change it. Absolute silence. I could no longer feel my legs. Wren had raised her camera again, and the low click of the shutter was the only thing moving in the room. Third thing, Callum turned his head half a centimeter. He found my eyes. He didn't look away. Evelyn Hart was the only person in that hall, in that restaurant, at that family dinner, and in this room tonight, who didn't try to gain anything from my last name. I would have lost a billion-dollar merger before letting a single headline call this woman anything she isn't. I'm going to lose whatever it takes from this night on. The photographs projected on that screen are fake. Anyone who wants proof, speak to my attorney. Good night. He handed back the microphone. He didn't wait for applause. There was no applause. There was the sound of 150 people trying to decide, all at once, which side of the story they wanted to be on tomorrow. He left through the same door he'd come in without looking back even once. Theo stayed behind, opened his coat, turned to the curator, and began to speak in a low voice about lawsuits, with the calm of someone who'd had that conversation many times in his life. Sienna was still holding the microphone she was no longer using. Her red dress had suddenly become too long. Her perfect makeup looked like a mask that had forgotten to come down with the rest of her. I stood in the middle of the gallery with flashes around me. Wren came closer, pressed her elbow against mine, saying nothing. She didn't pull me. She just stood there, her shoulder against mine, steady. I looked at the high ceiling, where the old light fixtures hid new wiring. I looked at the dark wood floor, with the thin marks of other women's heels. I looked at the screen where the fake image of my face was now slowly switching off, becoming just a white square that lit the walls, and then a dead gray that returned the room to the real world. My whole life I had worked to not appear in any room. I'd come in through the back. I'd gone out through the back. I'd mended what tore in other people's dresses so that no one would look at me and ask my name. And now, for the first time in my life, I was standing in the middle of a room with 150 people knowing my full name. And I couldn't decide, with any honesty at all, whether I wanted to run for the back door, or whether I was already tired of only knowing that one. Chapter 5: Rebuilding in Silence. 2 weeks after the gallery, on a Sunday morning, the atelier still smelled of the coffee I hadn't drunk. The smell came from the cup forgotten on the cutting table, cold for at least an hour, with the mark of my lipstick where my mouth had decided not to work right since Friday. A thin film had already formed on the surface, an opaque ring I pretended not to see. I was sitting on the high stool, my back to the door, with a 1962 evening dress laid open on the table. The lace of the bodice had a tear shaped like a half moon. I'd fix it in 40 minutes on any other day. That morning, I'd already threaded the wrong needle 3 times, and on the 4th attempt the thread slipped out again, fine and stubborn, as if it too no longer wanted to cooperate with me. The light coming through the front window was milky, sifted by the snow that had fallen during the night. The shelves with rolls of fabric looked taller than usual. The mannequin in the corner, dressed in a half-finished black bodice, looked like a polite witness. The doorbell chimed. I knew who it was before I turned, not by the sound, by the silence that came with it. Callum walked into any place bringing his own vacuum with him. I turned slowly, still with the needle between my fingers. He was there, alone. No car with a driver waiting outside. No Theo trailing him. No expensive coat trying to say something for him. Just a dark overcoat, shoes wet with melted snow, and an expression I'd never seen on that face. It wasn't the polite contrition of a rich man. It was exhaustion. His shoulders were a little lower than I remembered, and there was a gray shadow under his eyes that no expensive barber could have hidden. I didn't bring anything, he said, before I could ask. No flowers, no gift, no spokesperson. May I come in? I pointed to the stool on the other side of the table with the end of the needle. I didn't smile. He crossed the atelier slowly, as if measuring his step so as not to wake the room. His shoes left 2 small damp crescents on the wood floor, and I noticed that before I noticed him, because it was safer. He sat. He rested his hands on his knees. I noticed his hands because it was easier than noticing the rest. They were hands I already knew too well up close, and now they were still in an almost formal way, as if he'd rehearsed what they'd do. I'll speak and you listen if you want, he said. If you want me to stop, you say so, and I stop. Go on, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He breathed, slowly, the way of someone who'd had to learn to breathe before speaking. I saw your name in a report 9 days after that kiss in the hall. It was a file from my image team, a list of women suitable for humanizing the CEO before the merger. They'd marked your name in yellow ink. I didn't ask for that list. I didn't approve it, but I saw it, and I hid it from you. He stopped. He looked at my hand closed over the lace. I hid it because I thought that if you knew, you'd leave. And I couldn't bring myself to live out the rest of the week without you, because of a piece of paper I hadn't even authorized. The half moon in the dress's lace seemed, at that instant, generous. At least fabrics warned you when they tore. At least the fiber left the damage in plain sight so someone could decide whether to fix it. You used me for the investors, I said. That was one thing. I already knew that. It hurt, and it passed. But hiding a piece of paper with my name marked on it is another. You decided alone what I was allowed to know about my own life. I know. You don't have the right to do that, Callum. I know. Say it again. I don't have the right to do that. I set down the needle. It hit the wood with a minimal click that filled the entire atelier. For a second, it was the only sound in the world, and the silence around it widened until it touched the walls. I spent my life moving through the back rooms of other people's houses. I went on. I know what it's like to be treated as a part that gets swapped out when it's in the way. I won't be that again. Not for your fear, not for your courage, not for anything with a check behind it. I'm not going to offer you a check. I know you're not. I looked at him for the first time without the filter of anger, and it was worse. Without the anger in between, his face came too close to mine, and my breathing had to learn to get past it. You spent years being molded to win. You never learned to be honest when you were afraid. I understand. I understand it from the bottom of my heart. But understanding isn't the same as accepting. He nodded. He didn't argue. His mouth closed into a line that trembled once before holding firm. 3 things, I said. I raised 3 fingers. Distance, respect, truth. Without all 3, there's no reconciliation. No more dinners, no more atelier. You don't show up without warning. You don't talk about me in interviews. You don't decide what I get to hear. I accept all 3, then leave. He stood. He didn't try to touch my hand. He went to the door, stopped with his fingers on the latch, and looked at me over his shoulder. I'll wait, he said. But I won't wait trying to push you. The doorbell chimed again when he left. I sat looking at the half moon in the lace for a long time, until the seams started to make sense again. Then I sewed the dress in silence, without crying, the way I sewed everything when the atelier was the only thing in the world that obeyed my hands. When I looked up, the coffee had gone completely cold, and the light from the window had changed color. On Tuesday, the courier arrived at 3 in the afternoon with a brown envelope. No return address. Ren was with me, legs crossed on the low client's sofa, eating oatmeal cookies straight from the package. The smell of cinnamon filled her corner of the atelier, and she'd taken off her shoes, as she always did when she figured she was staying a while. If it's a check, I'm tearing it up before you do, she said, without taking her eyes off her phone. I opened the envelope. The paper scraped rough against my nail. It wasn't a check. It was a set of invoices. The atelier roof, that leak in the back I'd mapped out 8 months ago and never had the money to fix. Maintenance on the 2 industrial machines. Replacement of the front window, which had been cracked since the second encounter with the press. All paid. All settled in my name. No card. No note. Just receipts, arranged in chronological order, with a metal clip holding the set together. Heart, Ren said, and her voice lost its sarcasm. Who did this? I already knew. I called the number of the contractor listed on the first invoice. The attendant confirmed. The payment had been made by a third party who'd requested absolute confidentiality. The third party's name was in the internal system, she said, but she couldn't reveal it. She apologized politely. I thanked her politely too, and hung up carefully, as if the phone also needed to be respected. Ren looked at me in silence when I hung up. The cookie had stopped halfway to her mouth. It was him, I said. Are you giving it back? I thought about it. I looked at the roof, where the dark stain of the leak was now just an old shadow, with no wet shine. I looked at the window, no crack, reflecting the whole atelier back to me in a single smooth pane. I looked at my hands, which had spent 8 months sewing against the leak and against the fear of losing the place where I'd finally built something of my own. No, I said, this isn't a purchase. This is reparation. He damaged things with his name around mine. He's paying for what he damaged. Ren chewed the cookie. She nodded once. All right, she said. Yeah, but if he shows up with flowers, I'm tearing up the flowers. Agreed. On Thursday, at 7 in the evening, I came in through the service door of the Charlemont, a luxury hotel in downtown Boston, with that familiar feeling of belonging by the back way. The service hallway smelled of industrial laundry and furniture polish. The historical curator was a woman in her 50s named Imogen Brace, who had short white hair and thin-rimmed glasses. She'd asked me to come up to the historical lobby on the 3rd floor, where the hotel's collection of Victorian fabrics was being reassessed. The historical lobby was a long room, high-ceilinged, with low chandeliers casting warm light over closed display cases. It smelled of old paper and cedar. The fabric seemed to sleep behind the glass. When we sat down with the tea, Imogen opened a leather folder and pushed a contract toward me. The leather had given off a faint smell of old tobacco when she opened it. Full restoration, she said. 12 pieces, 12 months, fee in advance on the first page. I looked at the number. It was the biggest contract of my life. How did you find me? I asked. Imogen took off her glasses. She cleaned them on a flannel cloth. She put them back on. The gesture was slow enough for me to understand she'd been expecting the question, and a referral from someone who asked me not to use their name. She looked at me directly. But I'll be honest with you, Hart. I saw your work on the Ainsworth Vale. You'd have been invited regardless. The referral just made me call 3 weeks early. I held the pen. Its ink had a good weight between my fingers. I almost refused on principle. I almost refused out of pride. I almost refused because he had tightened his grip on my name again, even without showing up. Imogen noticed. She waited. She didn't touch her tea. Is the work mine? I asked. You won't want a name around mine when the credits come? The work is yours, she said. The credits are yours. I have no contact with Pierce Meridian. It was a word-of-mouth referral. Professional to professional. You sign as Evelyn Hart. I signed as Evelyn Hart. The pen scratched the paper with a clean sound. No hesitation. I left the hotel stepping slowly through the snow. The night was still, no wind, and each breath came out visible in front of my face before vanishing. I thought about calling Callum to argue and giving up on it. I thought about calling to thank him and giving up on that too. In the end, I didn't call. I sent a single message. No greeting. I know it was you. I took the job because it's good. Keep not saying my name in interviews. His reply came in less than a minute. Agreed. On Saturday night, I was alone in the atelier with the lights low, finishing a moss green velvet coat from 1947, when the doorbell chimed for the second time that week. The velvet smelled of cedar, and the old perfume of some woman who'd been happy inside it. Callum stood at the door with 2 coffees and rain on his shoulder. The steam rose thin from the cups, and the rain had stuck a strand of hair to his forehead. I didn't come to talk, he said. I came to be quiet, if you'll let me. I looked at the coat open on the table, the yellow light of the bench lamp, the still night outside. I looked at the empty chair on the other side. Sit, I said. I pushed a dress that needed restoring toward him, with the hem hanging by a thread. I'll put you to use. He took off his overcoat. He hung it on the hook by the entrance. He sat. He set one of the coffees on my table, away from the fabric on the safe side, and pushed it toward me without asking anything in return. He took the needle I passed him without saying anything more, and bowed his head over the hem, like someone praying. We sewed. For 2 hours. No music. No talking. The lamp hummed low, a constant end-of-night sound. The snow tapped the new window with small muffled touches. The coffee went cold between us, and neither of us drank, and neither of us commented. At some point, on the third dress of the night, his hand crossed mine over the bodice lace, and neither of us commented. He kept pulling the thread. I kept holding the piece steady. Our hands separated when the thread found the knot. His fingers trembled once. So did mine. When he got up to leave, at 1 a.m, he stood with his hand on the door latch the way he'd stood on Sunday. Thank you for the roof, I said, without raising my eyes. And for the window. You're welcome, he said. The doorbell chimed. The door closed. I stood in the dark atelier with the 2 empty cups on the table and realized, with an honesty that hurt, that I missed him before the outer door even shut at the bottom of the stairs. Chapter 6. The Seam That Doesn't Hide. Sunday morning, and Boston was under that kind of low winter sun that makes the snow look whiter by contrast. The antiques market in South End filled 3 connected warehouses and 2 blocks of sidewalk with trestle tables, bronze candlesticks, bound books, stopped clocks, mirrors with peeling mercury, the smell of old wax and reheated coffee. At some distant stall, someone had opened a crate of vinyl records, and the smell of damp cardboard mixed with the mothballs escaping from the hat boxes stacked on the floor. Callum waited for me on the corner. No car, no driver, with a dark beanie pulled down over his ears that I never would have guessed existed in his wardrobe. I almost laughed when I turned and saw him. Almost. He'd turned up the collar of his overcoat against the wind, and his cheeks were slightly red, his hair mussed under the wool, and he looked at me with the expression of a man who knew exactly how ridiculous he looked, and had decided to accept it. You're disguised as an ordinary person, I said. Trying, he said. It's pretty bad. I know. We walked side by side among the tables. I'd brought a cloth bag folded in my pocket, like someone going to market. He shoved his gloved hands into the pockets of his overcoat and let me lead. The old snow crunched under our boots, and now and then, a vendor looked up from a paper cup, recognized something in the line of his jaw, hesitated, and went back to the coffee. No one said anything. It was the first morning in 8 weeks that I'd walked beside him without feeling my neck strain to spot a camera. The conversation was small on purpose. He asked me where I'd gotten the idea to restore dresses. I said I'd started with my grandmother's curtains, which were too good to throw away, and no one in the family wanted to deal with them. I told him I'd learned to sew over the dining nook table, under the low light of a lamp my grandmother insisted on calling enough light, and that the first whole piece I restored was a Sunday apron that still held the smell of cinnamon. He listened with that slow attention of his, without interrupting, without pretending to understand more than he did. He told me his father had died 4 years ago, and that, on the eve of the funeral, he discovered his father had kept, in a shoebox, the letters of a woman who wasn't his mother. He talked about it the way someone comments on the weather. He said he'd read 3 of the letters before closing the box, and that he'd decided, right there, that he wasn't going to read the rest. He said he didn't know whether that had been cowardice or charity. I noticed it was the first time he'd told me something about his father without my asking. At one of the tables, he stopped in front of a bronze candlestick with 3 crooked arms and a green chain of oxide. It was, without any doubt, the ugliest thing at the market. The vendor, an old woman in a purple scarf, looked at the two of us with the patience of someone who'd been there since before dawn. "I'm going to take it," he said. "You are not." "I am. It has 3 crooked arms." "I have 3 crooked arms too," he said, in that low voice I always loved without knowing whether I should. "We understand each other," I laughed. It was small, but it came out whole. It was my first laugh in 2 weeks that didn't leave a weight in my throat. He paid for the candlestick in cash, counted the bills slowly, thanked the woman by the name on her badge, and wrapped the piece in newspaper with the care of someone wrapping something valuable. He offered to carry it in my bag, because his own was already full with a tin tea box and a leather-bound book with a broken spine. We walked back. The streets of Southend were nearly empty, and the wind blew cold against my cheek on one side only. At some block, we turned a wrong corner on purpose, to pass in front of a bakery that smelled of warm butter. He didn't buy anything. He just slowed his step, closed his eyes for a second, and went on. The atelier had the afternoon light coming in obliquely through the new window. The glass still had, in the lower corner, a small installation sticker I hadn't had the heart to scrape off. I set the candlestick on the cutting table, next to the scissors. He took off his boots at the door without my asking. He hung his overcoat on the hook where, 3 months earlier, I'd hung only my own coat. He stood in his socks on the old wood floor, the beanie still in his pocket, looking 10 years younger than he had any right to look. I hadn't planned it. It went like this. I looked at him, from across the table, with the ugly candlestick between us. He looked back at me. He waited. That was his best, waiting when it mattered. I went around the table slowly. Each step sounded on the floorboards. I raised both hands. I held his face. His skin was still cold from the street, and I felt, beneath my palm, the slow beat of his jaw tightening, and I kissed him. It was the opposite of the Ainsworth Hall. It was without music, without an audience, without flashes, without a sewing kit almost falling. It was with the low January sun striking his shoulder, with the ridiculous candlestick between us, with both my hands firm on the face that 8 months earlier had kidnapped me from anything resembling the small life I wanted. He responded with care, without grabbing, without rushing, like someone who understands that kiss was mine, not his. I felt his breath go deeper in the middle of the kiss, just once, and return to the controlled rhythm. When I pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine for a second and breathed deeply. "Everything I invented to flee from my past," he said in a low voice, "is standing inside the atelier of a woman who mends torn things." "You're still too dramatic," I said, but my hand was still on his face. "I know. It's a flaw." "It is," he said. "I'm in no hurry to fix it." I smiled without quite letting him see. We sewed until the end of the afternoon, but this time talking. He pulled the low stool to the side of my bench and stayed there, threading the needle when I asked, without complaining about the silence between one bit of talk and the next. He told me about Montreal, about a hotel he wanted to reopen with a different curation, about a room that had a crystal chandelier no one knew whether it was worth restoring. I said it was hard to decide what's worth restoring before looking up close. He said that was exactly his problem with his whole life. When the sun went down, he asked, carefully, if I wanted to have dinner out. I answered that I'd rather have dinner at his apartment. He nodded, without celebrating, without widening his smile. He grabbed his overcoat, waited for me to lock the door, and held my hand on the sidewalk with the naturalness of someone who'd never been forbidden to. Callum's apartment in Boston was in an old building in Back Bay, no name hanging in the lobby and no doorman pretending not to recognize him. We rode up the elevator in silence. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was the loaded silence of people who've already decided and are just waiting for the door to open. The elevator was a cabin of dark wood, with an oval mirror on the back wall, and I avoided looking at myself in it. I looked only at his hand, still gloved, closed over the key. The door opened. We went in. He took off his overcoat. I took off my coat. The hallway light of the building fell yellow over the rug for 2 seconds before the door closed. The lock clicked shut with a dry snap. He reached for the switch in the hall, and the inside hallway light went out. When I woke up, it was the morning of a winter Monday, and I had his white shirt open over my skin, hair undone, and the smell of his home already seemed, treacherously, like something I recognized. The bedroom window looked out onto a piece of pizzeria roof and a steel-colored winter sky. The curtains were half drawn, and a thin band of gray light fell over the rumpled sheet near my knee. I lay there a whole minute trying to remember when, in my life, I'd woken in silence without needing to check whether someone was angry. I went out barefoot to the kitchen. The wood floor was cold under my heels, and I wrapped his shirt tighter against my skin, fastening the last button that still existed. He was already there, in gray sweatpants and the blue cotton shirt he wore when there were no investors in sight. He was making coffee. He made it with the care of someone who'd never been taught, but had learned in secret over the last 2 weeks. He had a small spoon in his hand and was measuring the grounds with the patience of someone measuring for another person. "Good morning, Hart," he said, without turning. "Good morning, Pierce." He looked at me over his shoulder. He smiled small. It was a smile I'd never seen on his mouth inside a hall. I leaned against the kitchen counter. The stone was cold against my leg, and I pulled his shirt down a little more. In an automatic gesture, he handed me a cup. Our fingers crossed beneath the cup and stayed there a second longer than necessary. I didn't withdraw. Neither did he. His hand covered mine on the cold stone of the counter with a weight I recognized before I thought about it. "No deadline," I said. "No clause. No public lie. No deadline. No clause. No public lie," he repeated. No entourage at the atelier door. No entourage. No offer of a check for anything. "I'll never again offer a check for anything that matters," he said, and his voice had a funny weight, as if he were laughing at himself at the back of his throat. "I learned from Hart. Took you long enough." "It did," he agreed. "I know." I laughed softly. I drank the coffee. It was good. It was a little strong, but it was good. I sat on the high kitchen stool. He leaned against the counter facing me, his cup in both hands. We stayed there a while without saying anything more. The refrigerator hummed. The heating clicked in the baseboard. Outside, a delivery truck braked at the corner, and someone shouted something in Italian to the driver. Boston outside was beginning its day. At some point, his phone buzzed on the counter, making the coffee spoon clink inside the empty cup beside it. He excused himself with his eyes. "Theo," he said to me, before answering. Theo was his attorney, the thin man with square glasses who'd organized half of Callum's life for years, and who, the few times I'd seen him, always spoke as if every word cost money. He answered. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to me. He spoke quietly. I wasn't paying attention to the content. I was paying attention to the voice. That's when I noticed. It was a small thing. It was a half-second pause between one answer and another. It was a word he swallowed before pronouncing it. I couldn't say which, only that it had existed. It was a slight lowering of his shoulders, a millimeter, that he corrected before going on. It was his free hand quickly touching the window frame, like someone anchoring himself to a solid surface before continuing to answer. It wasn't fear. It wasn't distrust. It wasn't any of the things I'd already learned to name. It was just a faint sense that there was something, in some corner of the story we were beginning there, that Monday morning over the cold counter, that still hadn't been said. I took a sip of coffee. I felt the warmth go down. I looked at his back outlined against the gray window, at the calm line of his shoulders, at the hand holding the phone with polite firmness, and thought that maybe it was nothing. I thought that maybe it was just the shadow that every new morning casts over those who don't yet fully trust. I decided, without saying it out loud, that I was going to find out what it was, later. Hey, Kay here. That's it for book 1. But guess what? Book 2 is already done. You can grab access to it for just a small fee. I lived 8 months of peace beside the CEO who kissed me in front of everyone and turned me into the elite's favorite scandal. I thought Callum Pierce had finally chosen me. For real. Not as a convenient lie. Until the night of my opening. In the middle of the toast, with my name shining on the walls, my phone buzzed. Anonymous message. Few words. Surgical images. The kiss that changed everything. Our first. Dissected like a plan. Suddenly, those 8 months turned to smoke. I asked a single question and his pause was deafening. The floor vanished. Fate turned into strategy. The man I loved was hiding something capable of destroying us both. And I felt in his silence that the deception was real. What if the kiss had never been for me? What if the 8 months were only the time he needed? What if, in choosing to love me, Callum Pierce was still betraying me? Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to catch the upcoming ones, look for Kay's Sweet Love on YouTube for the best billionaire and CEO romance content. Remember, the official channels are Kay's Sweet Love on YouTube and the My Stories platform. I'll be waiting for you there. With love, Kay. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book too, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.